Business and Labor in the Industrial Era, 1860 to 1900. After studying this unit, students should be able to answer the following questions in full. 1. What factors stimulated the unprecedented industrial and agricultural growth in the late 19th century? 2. Who are the entrepreneurs who pioneered the growth of big business? What were their goals? And what strategies did they use to dominate their respective industry? 3. What role did the federal government play in the nation's economic development during this period? 4. Analyze the ways in which the class structure and lives of women changed in the late 19th century. And 5. Assess the efforts of workers to organize unions to promote their interests during this era. Industrial and agricultural growth. Corporate agriculture. Agriculture, meanwhile, also went through a line of corporatization. Large bonanza farms ran like factories for professional managers and helped move the agricultural economy further away from small farms and toward an industrial model. The corporatized agricultural and industrial sectors helped stimulate each other, and by 1870, the United States emerged as the world's leading producer of agricultural products. Technological innovation. Innovations. The growth of manufacturing after the Civil War sparked an innovative streak in the Americans, resulting in the inventions such as barbed wire, refrigerated boxcars, air brakes for trains, and the telephone. Changes in production methods that focused on mass production and efficiency allowed industries to produce more products faster and at lower cost. Lower industries, due to economies of scale, were able to afford the expensive new technologies, and large workforces needed to boost their production all the more, which often undermined the abilities of smaller businesses to compete. Alexander Graham Bell's telephone began as a speaking telegraph in 1875 and was patented in 1876. Bell's American Telephone and Telegraph (AT&T) expanded as Bell added long-distance telephone lines. By 1895, there were over 300,000 telephones in use. The people could communicate audibly across long distances and also in an instant. Typewriters and sewing machines. Office managers often viewed women as better candidates for a typist position because they worked for lower wages and were assumed to have greater manual dexterity. This led to an increase in clerical positions for women and opened economic opportunities for them, even though they continued to earn lower wages than men. Women also were favored in industries that used sewing machines. The new Singer sewing machines and sweatshops emerged in most cities and employed large numbers of young women, mostly immigrants, to sew cloth and linen, and often in dangerous conditions. Thomas Alva Edison emerged as America's most influential inventor. His experiments with the patents on mechanical inventions allowed him to perform more experiments, and as he gained a reputation as an inventor, he was able to focus on his experiments and inventions. He opened a scientific village in Menlo Park, New Jersey in 1876, which was the nation's first industrial research laboratory. Edison and his assistants helped invent or adapt many technologies that changed people's lives. His long-lasting incandescent electric light bulb in 1879 probably had the largest impact, as long hours were now available for people to work, study, and to read if they had access to electricity. Nikola Tesla, an apprentice of Edison, used alternating current, AC. Edison believed that the higher voltage AC was too dangerous and resigned to form his own company. George Westinghouse decided to invest into Tesla's company. Both believed that AC was even more effective. George Westinghouse and his Westinghouse Electric Company developed an alternating current system for electricity, which allowed electrical companies to transmit electricity at higher voltages along electric wires, but step down using transformers closer to their points of use. Nikola Tesla, a Croatian immigrant who worked for Edison, invented the alternating current motor dynamo, which he sold to Westinghouse, and AC emerged as the victor in the AC/DC competition. Electricity now allowed companies to locate their factories in a wider range of areas instead of being limited to the availability of geographical features, such as running water or coal deposits. The Railroad Revolution. Trains in time. Railroads allowed people and goods to move distances faster than ever before. Towns with train stations, especially in rural areas, tended to grow, whereas those that were not connected to railroads shrank or died. Railroads needed to stay on schedule to allow for more predictable deliveries and to avoid collisions, which led to the invention of both national and international time zones and increased use of wristwatches. As railroads were constructed, telegraph wires and poles were installed alongside them, bringing transportation and communication across the nation. Trains in the industrial area were the first industries to represent big business or corporations. More railroads, linking the western half of the continent to the economic development capabilities of the East. The Central Pacific Railroad working east from Sacramento, California, and the Union Pacific working west from Omaha, Nebraska, built the first transcontinental railroad, meeting in 1865 at Promontory, Utah. Railroads were constructed by private companies, which raised the necessary funds by selling bonds. Originally concerned about the constitutionality of federal involvement in financing railroads, precluded the government from being involved in the construction, but beginning in the 1850s, schemes that were provided federal land to the builders were approved. Building the transcontinentals, the work of giants. According to General William Tecumseh Sherman, the building of the Transcontinental Railroad was the work of giants. The railroads required efforts and ingenuity on part of the surveyors, engineers, and workers who built them, and they recruited consistent funding sources and large labor forces. The Pacific Railway Act was passed in 1866 by a largely Republican Congress during the Civil War, while Southern Democrats mostly joined the Confederacy. It authorized the construction of a railway by two companies who would compete to construct a railway that connected the nation's railway network across the West from Omaha, Nebraska to Sacramento, California. The Union Pacific Railroad Company began in Omaha and worked westward. Meanwhile, the Central Pacific Railway Company began in Sacramento and moved eastward. Conditions for workers were harsh, and many workers were killed or injured during the project. The Pacific Railway Act spurred each company to work quickly and sometimes cut corners by granting more money to the company that laid the most track in the shortest time. Railroad workers and many Union Pacific workers were young, single, former Civil War, both Confederate and Union soldiers, Irish, and German immigrants, or African Americans who had been slaves. Most of the Central Pacific workers, on the other hand, were young, single Chinese workers who had moved to California seeking gold or looking for jobs to raise money for their families back in China. These so-called coolie laborers, manual laborers in Hindu, encountered racial prejudice and discrimination, low pay, and dangerous conditions. However, they accomplished daunting tasks by working together and were responsible for building most of the Central Pacific Railway. Laying track for these railways involved a series of sequential tasks that often encountered interruptions or delays. Nevertheless, on overall, the Union Pacific had constructed 1,086 miles of track, largely over prairie, but also including the Rocky Mountains. The Central Pacific had only built 689 miles, but more of its route included the mountains. On May 10, 1869, California's governor, Leland Stanford, a part owner of the Central Pacific Railway Company, officially connected the two lines by driving a symbolic golden spike at Primary Summit in Utah Territory. The rise of big business, the growth of corporations. Increasingly, large corporations, collectively known as big business, helped enhance the U.S. economy and economic power internationally. The economic power gave increased influence to its company leaders and allowed them to bribe local, state, and national leaders to encourage them to continue supporting big business. Corporations, by definition, are legally separate entities, bodies, from their owners, who separate the ownership of an enterprise or business from its management operations, thus protecting their owners and part owners who purchase the shares of ownership through stocks. The two major advantages of the corporations are that a corporation can outlive its founders, and its officials and shareholders are not personally liable for its debts. An effect of the rise of corporations in America was a stimulation of capital investment and technological advances, fighting competition. Capitalist theory asserts that competition among business reduces corruption and increases innovation by preventing one group from taking control and stagnating. As giant corporations emerged during this period, however, some big business owners started to view competition with distrust because it undermined their own profit potential. They sought to eliminate or minimize competition, sometimes through secret agreements to fix set prices as a certain limit, and sometimes by their either buying weaker companies or driving them out of business. Critics of these large corporations labeled them robber barons, who are becoming an aristocratic class with undue wealth and power in the United States using shady means. Two ways they did this is one, by vertical integration, the consolidation of numerous production functions from the extraction of the raw materials to the distribution and marketing of the finished product under the direction of one firm. An example was Gustavus Swift's control of all aspects of meat packing. Horizontal integration is the merger of competitors in the same industry by buying out competitors in the same industry. The barons of business. The first one, John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller began refining oil from the nearby fields in Pennsylvania. His initial $4,000 investment in his first refinery in Cleveland, Ohio. Meeting with Cornelius Vanderbilt, he promises to supply 60 barrels a day, although he can only do 30 barrels. He needs investors. Kerosene has a very bad name, and Rockefeller convinces investors that oil refinery, barrel making, shipping, and guaranteeing a uniform product to set the standard gets his investors in creating the Standard Oil Company. In competition, he ships his product around the country at cheap rates with Vanderbilt and refines more oil than Vanderbilt can actually ship. Tom Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad would give Rockefeller a 40% rebate for every barrel that he ships. Rockefeller begins to buy out his competitors, his goal to own every refinery in the country. Through vertical integration, Rockefeller buys them and then shuts them down. To control the market, he organizes companies into trusts. Trusts allow a trustee in the form of a corporation to manage other companies instead of owning them outright. Standard Oil becomes the country's first monopoly, and at age 33, he's the most powerful man in the country. But he was very cutthroat. When Vanderbilt tries to stop Rockefeller, denying him the use of the railroads by increasing their rates, Tom Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad tries to break into the oil business. Rockefeller threatens to ship his oil on other railroads unless Scott reconsiders. Scott calls his bluff. Rockefeller sees that transporting oil in short distances can also be done in long distances and cut railroads out for good. So he'd build a 4,000-mile long pipeline connecting his oil wells in Pennsylvania to his refinery in Cleveland, Ohio. He shuts down the Pittsburgh refineries, and no oil is shipped on the Pennsylvania Railroad. Scott loses half his business. He has to lay off half his workers and cuts wages. The workers, in turn violent and set fire to the train yards. 29 buildings and 1,200 train cars are destroyed. When Rockefeller is done, he'll control 90% of the oil refining business. His net worth was $150 million, which equals about $225 billion today, by the time of his death in 1937. Rockefeller's remaining fortune, largely tied up in permanent family trust, was estimated at $1.4 billion. Today, about $336 billion. Andrew Carnegie made his name in steel industry using a new process that inexpensively made steel stronger, the Bessemer conversion. Carnegie flooded the market with his product and became wealthy. By 1900, the Carnegie Steel Company was the world's largest industry, with 20,000 employees, and mills that ran non-stop, except on Independence Day. Andrew Carnegie comes to America with $3.25 in his pocket as an immigrant from Scotland. At the age of 12, he works for the Pennsylvania Railroad in Pittsburgh. Tom Scott takes him under his wing and sees him as someone to nurture. His big break came at age 24. He was the manager of the company and oversees the expansion of the West. He is tasked to build a bridge expanding the Mississippi River. That way, he can now move west over a mile-long bridge. Carnegie invests everything into the building of the bridge, using a new process, the Bessemer steel, and combined with iron and carbon over at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and he sees that steel is the future of America. He travels to steel mills, meets with scientists, and uses the Bessemer process, and a steel rail is now produced from 2 weeks to 15 minutes. With the steel in place, construction begins and finishes in St. Louis Bridge in 1873. With Scott's help, he raises $21 million to build his first steel plant of Carnegie Steel on 100 acres in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The mill produces 225 tons of steel a day. Tom Scott never recovered from Rockefeller, and in the Panic of 1873, without the railroad, loses his market for steel, and Carnegie blames Rockefeller. Skyscrapers are seen as the future of steel, not in rails, but in structural steel beams. 100,000 buildings of steel are built in Chicago alone. Carnegie would control 70% of the steel manufacturing in the country. Sells to Morgan. J.P. Morgan has controlling interest in manufacturing railroads and steel, and bring them all together. Consolidating Steel, complete takeover of Carnegie Steel, he sets up a meeting with Charles Schwab, Carnegie's right-hand man. Schwab tells Carnegie that they could sell his steel to J.P. Morgan. Carnegie writes down a price of $480 million, about $13.6 billion, higher than the budget of the United States. Morgan accepts the offer. He is now the richest man in America. And Morgan creates U.S. Steel, the biggest corporation in the world, and will dominate the steel business for 100 years and become the first billion-dollar industry. J. Pierpont Morgan. J.P. Morgan was a financier, and he made his money through the banking industry. He took over failing companies and turns them around. Julius Morgan, his father, founded a financial empire and was a transatlantic banker. J.P. is taught to invest in other people's money, to make a fortune for yourself. At the age of 40, looks to create an identity of his own. He wants to build a business from the ground up, similar to Rockefeller and Carnegie. Edison Electric. Morgan believes electricity will revolutionize the world. He has Edison install electricity in his Fifth Avenue home. Morgan wants to know how much money it would take to power New York and invest everything in electricity. In today's money, Morgan's invests $83 million in the Edison Electric Light Company. He transforms a building in Manhattan into a central power station. Niagara Falls, the world's largest power plant to be built into a 2.5-mile-long tunnel of bedrock. Water will flow through it and turn the turbines to transmit electricity to light the entire Northeast. J.P. Morgan invests $3 million in Edison and on the bid on the contract. Whoever controls Niagara Falls controls the future of electricity. Morgan designs a smear campaign to lower the stock on Westinghouse. The investors sell off Westinghouse stock. Now it seemed no competition in order to win the contract. And a magnanimous and historical making gesture, Tesla said he tore up the contract. He was, after all, grateful to one man who believed in his invention, Westinghouse. Tesla gives George Westinghouse his patents, and Westinghouse now bids and was awarded the contract to create the powerhouse. Mergers, Morganization, taking companies that are fighting each other and bringing them together. Morgan goes after Westinghouse and everything he owns, including the patents. Westinghouse would sign over the patents to Morgan. He then decides to streamline Edison and buys up additional stock and owns the majority of the company and changes its name to General Electric, consolidating the electric industry. In 1890, he had controlled 1/6 of the nation's railroads. In addition to a series of rapid acquisitions and mergers, we already know that Morgan bought Carnegie Steel. In the panic of 1893, the country was broke. The federal treasury was nearly out of gold. President Grover Cleveland accepted Morgan's offer to join with the Rothschilds to supply the U.S. Treasury with 3.5 million ounces of gold to restore the Treasury surplus in exchange for a 30-year bond issue. The episode saved the Treasury, but hurt Cleveland's standing with the agrarian wing of the Democratic Party and became an issue in the election of 1896, when banks came under a withering attack from William Jennings Bryan. Sears and Roebuck. Richard Sears and Alva Roebuck opened up a mail order company in the 1800s. By eliminating the middleman, they could ship goods from a catalog to people throughout the United States. Catalog businesses benefited many Americans in rural areas by making it possible for them to buy the kinds of goods they otherwise would have to travel to cities to reach or wait for a traveling salesperson to visit their area. In a lot of ways, it was the first internet. The Gospel of Wealth. Andrew Carnegie's essay, The Gospel of Wealth, in 1889, put into words what many of the big business leaders thought about their vast wealth and their social responsibilities. They saw poverty as a character flaw. Carnegie argued that the accumulation of wealth by certain individuals benefited the Anglo-Saxon race by allowing them to help others through philanthropic ventures. Philanthropy. Carnegie gave away $350 million, and Rockefeller did much of the same with their wealth, especially to support education, medicine, the arts, and other causes. Rockefeller formed the Rockefeller Foundation that still funds philanthropic work today, and Carnegie made his goal to give away most of his $400 million before his death. Horatio Alger's Stories was a series of best-selling tales about young rags-to-riches heroes, first published in 1867, stressing the importance of neat clothes, cleanliness, thrift, and hard work. The books also highlighted the importance of a chance in getting ahead and the responsibility of those better off to serve as positive role models. It reinforced the gospel of wealth ideas. And of course, someone like Andrew Carnegie was their poster boy. The alliance of business and politics. Republicans and big business. At the state and federal levels during and after the Civil War, the Republican Party and big business considered one another as mutually beneficial, especially because both supported protective tariffs. The Morrill Tariff, passed during the Civil War, doubled taxes on many imported items. The U.S. government used this to raise money to fight the war and reward businesses for their continued support of the Republican Party. The Republican Party remained committed to high tariffs throughout the rest of the 19th century. The Legal Tender Act of 1862, the Republican controlled Congress also passed other legislation that helped stabilize the U.S. economy and pay for the war, including the Legal Tender Act of 1862, which authorized the United States to issue greenbacks, which was paper money. The National Banking Act of 1863 then created a national bank that issued the greenbacks. Both these measures led to uniform paper currency in the nation and benefited industry. The Homestead Act of 1862, President Lincoln and the Republicans in Congress also passed other economic legislation that benefited individuals and helped bring the new western states and territories into the nation's economy. The Homestead Act also granted 160 acres or more of free land to individuals who homesteaded, that is, lived and improved on the land for 5 years. This act allowed single women and freed slaves the opportunity to settle in the West, although half of the homesteads failed within a few years. The Morrill Land Grants College Act of 1862 gave 30,000 acres of federal land per member of Congress to the respective state to fund the creation of agricultural and mechanical arts colleges. These land grants were extended to former Confederate states following the war as well. Laissez-faire. During the 19th century, the United States subscribed to the economic policy of hands-off, or laissez-faire, roughly a French term that meant let them do as they will, approach in the economy. The government did not investigate the business practices, no legislation to protect workers and consumers. Business leaders spent time and a lot of money to ensure government officials stayed out of their business. An industrial society, the ways of the wealthy. Gilded Age. The term the Gilded Age was coined by Mark Twain that applied to the 19th century America that refers to the shallow display and worship of wealth characteristic of the period. By 1900, there were over 4,000 millionaires in the United States, compared to a few dozen in 1861. Madam C.J. Walker, a few were women, including Madam C.J. Walker, the daughter of freed Louisiana slaves who created hair products for African Americans. The nouveau rich, the growing wealthy class of millionaires in the United States, often consisted of financiers and industrialists who flaunted their wealth by throwing lavish parties, like a dinner for a dog who was given a $15,000 diamond necklace. Mansions in Newport, Rhode Island, Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, and New York's Fifth Avenue were used to display this wealth. More of the wealthy were white Republican voting Protestants. A growing middle class. The term middle class at first appeared in the 1830s, was commonplace by the 1870s. There were more Americans came to view themselves as members of the distinct social classes. White-collar professionals were editors, engineers, accountants, supervisors, managers, marketers, and retailers. For unmarried women, they worked as clerks, secretaries, salespeople, teachers, and librarians. The number of attorneys, physicians, professors, journalists, nurses, and social workers rose dramatically during this time period of 1870 to 1900. Middle class women. Dozens of women's colleges were funded after the Civil War, and many by the end of the century. Women made up more than a third of the college students. Here we see an astronomy class at New York's Vassar's College is underway in 1880. Most took home economics classes to perfect their housekeeping or social skills. Still, the door was cracked that allowed a few women to study law, medicine, science, and the arts. It also liberated some women from the home from the long-standing limits of other social roles. Neurasthenia. It was not uncommon for women who became active in society and managed to join professions outside the cult of domesticity to be diagnosed with neurasthenia by male doctors. Symptoms of this energy-draining psychological and physical disorder included fatigue, insomnia, hysteria, headaches, and depression. College-educated women were most frequently diagnosed with this disease when they became frustrated by the lack of meaningful career, but men could also be diagnosed with it. Doctors prescribed a variety of treatments and regimens to those suffering from neurasthenia, including the elixir invented by former Confederate cavalry officer John Stith Pemberton, called Coca-Cola. He presented Coca-Cola as an alternative to opium pain relievers. The elixir was a mixture with carbonated water, citric acid, sugar, and cocaine at his Jacobs Pharmacy in Atlanta, Georgia in 1886, where it became a best-selling soda fountain drink and also marketed as the valuable brain tonic. Jane Addams was diagnosed with neurasthenia when she failed to obtain what she considered to be a meaningful career after graduating from Rockford College in Illinois in 1881. Addams found meaning as a social worker after she founded Hull House in Chicago. Hull House provided education, skills training, and mentoring to young women and immigrants. Addams and her group of social workers helped encourage many middle-class women to look beyond the cult of domesticity and provide social service in what she called the real world. The Ladies' Home Journal. Most middle-class women during this period viewed their own domestically oriented lives as the real world. They embraced domestic life and subscribed to magazines that aimed to help women become better mothers, wives, and homemakers. The most popular of these magazines was the Lady Homes Journal, who had almost 2 million subscribers by 1910. Its editor, Edward Bulk, sought to provide a great clearinghouse of information for middle-class women on topics such as cooking, politics, sewing, religion, and fiction. The working class. By modern standards, the working conditions during the Industrial Revolution were often dangerous. The average work week was 59 hours, and the average wage equivalent to today's currency was $3.50 an hour. Wages rose during the Gilded Age, but skilled laborers often received better paid than unskilled workers. Unskilled workers were also the first to be laid off or their wages cut when recessions and depressions threatened the economy. Working women and children who were willing to work for lower wages than men were often hired by mills, mines, factories, and large businesses. The average wage for a woman in manufacturing was about $7 per week, whereas unskilled men earned $10 per week on average. Women also found jobs as cooks, nannies, and housemaids. After the Civil War, millions of children took jobs outside the home instead of working on their family farms. By 1880, 1/6 of the population of children worked a full-time job, Boys worked deep in coal mines, and girls worked in textile mills. By 1881, only 7 states had anti-child labor laws requiring children to be at least 12 before being hired. Parents who maybe regretted starting their children working early often supported child labor because they desperately needed the income and they brought to the family. Organized labor. The first forms of protest against labor conditions were disorganized, as many of the workers of these conditions were recent immigrants who often spoke a variety of languages and faced prejudices. Most of the farmers who worked in these conditions also were not familiar with the idea of civilized protest. In addition, early organization labor groups faced obstacles as just blacklisting by company owners or hiring of scabs, non-union workers, when unionized workers went on strike. Labor organizations and strikes. Damali McGuire's. Named after a woman who led a massive protest against landlords in Ireland in the 1840s, a group of Irish American coal miners, the Molly Maguires, used violence to achieve better working conditions in Pennsylvania coal mines. During 1874 to 1875, the group's terrorism caused the mine owners to hire the Pinkerton Detective Agency, a private detective firm, to infiltrate the Mollies and stop the movement. Eventually, 24 members of this group were convicted of murder and kidnapping by a non-Irish jury, and 10 were hanged. And the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 was a strike notable for the way the workers cooperated with one another. It was the first interstate strike in American history, resulting in the financial panic of 1873, during which railroad companies drastically cut wages. The strike eventually erupted in violence, and order was restored when federal troops intervened. The Sand Lot Incident. At a sand lot in San Francisco, a meeting to show support for the striking railroad workers became an attack on Chinese immigrants. The Chinese were easy scapegoats, as they tended to work for less and were perceived to steal American jobs. This led to, in 1882, Congress passing the Chinese Exclusion Act. Nativism stimulated proposals to restrict immigration, leading to bans on Asian citizenship for 10 years. It would eventually be repealed in 1943. Labor movement. In 1866, the National Labor Union, NLU, was founded, comprising labor and reform groups more interested in political and social reforms than in collective bargaining. Before disbanding in 1873, the NLU secured the Contract Labor Act, which encouraged employers to import workers by paying passage. The Knights of Labor, led by Uriah Smith Stevens. The Knights of Labor was a secret organization designed to protect its members from retaliation from employers. Its members, which numbered in the hundreds of thousands at its peak, allowed skilled and unskilled laborers to join irrespective of their race or gender. Mother Jones. Mary Jones, the self-declared mother of the labor movement, promoted higher wages, shorter hours, safer workplace, and child labor restrictions. Although she lost most of the strikes in which she participated, she lived to see her views become accepted by unions across the country. Anarchists believe that any form of government is abusive, controlled by the rich to exploit the poor. Many labor unions during the late 19th century pushed for the abolition of government to achieve their goals. The climax would become the Haymarket Square. In 1886, the Knights of Labor held a rally in Chicago's Haymarket Square to promote the 8-hour workday. A bomb was thrown into a crowd, a police officer. One officer was killed and several others were wounded. Although no one involved with the Knights was found guilty in this affair, They were guilty by association, and soon therefore its membership dwindled. The speakers were anarchists and German, and several of them would be tried for first-degree murder for inciting the riot, and several of them would end up being hanged. The backlash. After the Haymarket riot in 1886, there were about 1,400 strikes across the United States that involved about 700,000 workers. These strikes led to a backlash against labor unions. Although Terence Powderly and other union leaders attempted to help the public distinguish between labor unions and anarchists, the two groups remained connected in many Americans' minds. The efforts of the Knights of Labor did make strides, such as helping to bring about Bureau of Labor Statistics in 1884. Protecting workers' rights. American Federation of Labor in 1886 was organized with 25 skilled workers organizations and emphasized a workplace issues rather than a broad social program. Led by Samuel Gompers, the AFL allowed only skilled workers as their members and very gradually emerged as the permanent union in the United States. They were hostile to blacks and women due to them accepting lower wages. The American Federation of Labor became the major union for skilled workers and stressed collective bargaining. Representatives of a union negotiating with management on behalf of all members. The Homestead Strike. In 1892, the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers, the nation's largest craft union, went on strike in Carnegie's Homestead Works near Pittsburgh. An attempt to break the strike ended in bloodshed when members of the Pinkerton Detective Agency were brought to confront the strikers. Eventually, state militias were sent to protect workers not involved in the strike. In the Pullman strike, it paralyzed the economies of 27 states in 1894. Members of the American Railway Union, ARU, led by Eugene V. Debs, working at the Pullman Palace Car Company, went on strike. No member of the ARU would handle Pullman rail cars, sleep cars that were very popular. By mid-July, Midwest railway lines were stuck with cars on their tracks no one could touch. Eventually, President Cleveland ordered federal troops to remove the cars from the tracks, citing federal authority to deliver the mail, which at that time was done by train. In August of 1897, the anthracite coal workers at the Latimer mine near Hazleton, Pennsylvania, were laid off. The laborers who stayed were forced to accept lower wages, longer work days, increased costs in the company town, and dangerous working conditions. About 3 workers died every 2 days. Many of the 10,000 workers, mostly immigrants from Central and Eastern Europe, went on strike and argued that they were working in conditions close to slavery. After the management ceased to fulfill a promise of a wage raise, the mine owners enlisted the help of the country's sheriff and 150 armed men to stop the strike and make the workers leave. In the end, 19 unarmed miners were killed and 39 others were wounded. The event and the aftermath of the trial convinced about 15,000 miners to join the United Mine Workers Union. The Western Federation of Miners. William Big Bill Haywood and other militant labor leaders in the West sought to organize smelter workers and other hard rock miners. Their Western Federation of Miners, WFM, was viewed as a radical labor union by many and became part of many violent confrontations between the WFM and the mine operators in the private armies, secret spies, state militias, and federal troops that opposed it. The WFM recruited skilled and unskilled workers of all races, ethnic groups, and workers. The International Workers of the World, a meeting of some of the leading socialists and union leaders in Chicago in 1905, resulted in the formation of the International Workers of the World, the IWW, which was supposed to be the Revolutionary Labor Union, open to workers across the world, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, age, or citizenship status, who are willing to renounce capitalism. Because of their militant anti-capitalist stance, they are viewed as wobblies with suspension. The organization also suffered from internal division. Bill Haywood helped hold the group together, however, and argued for the use of strikes over labor agreements for basic human rights for all. The future. The Gilded Age industrial complex created a system in which owners were vastly separated from the workers in both wealth and working conditions. This will set the stage for government entities to intervene and find equilibrium.